On the evening of July 17, 1981, two steel walkways suspended above a hotel atrium in Kansas City collapsed onto the crowd below. 114 people were killed. More than 200 were injured. There was no earthquake, no explosion, no extraordinary external force. The walkways were carrying people, exactly what they were designed to hold. But the connection holding them up had been changed during construction, and the calculation that could have revealed the danger was never properly performed. For more than a year, the building stood as if nothing was wrong. This is the story of the Hyatt Regency walkway collapse and the system that forgot to check its own work. The Hyatt Regency Kansas City had experienced a warning before it ever opened. In 1979, during construction, part of the atrium roof collapsed. The incident caused significant damage and raised questions about construction and quality control. But the project continued. The hotel opened on July 1, 1980, with its enormous atrium as one of its defining architectural features. 3 suspended walkways crossed the space at different levels. The second and fourth floor walkways were vertically aligned, while the third floor walkway was independently suspended. The fourth floor walkway was supported from above by hanger rods. Those rods transferred the weight of the walkway through steel connections and into the structure above. To guests, the system looked elegant. To engineers, it was a carefully calculated load path. Every part had a job, and every connection had to be strong enough to carry the forces passing through it. The structural engineering was handled by Gillum Colaco. Haven Steel Company was responsible for fabricating the steel, and during construction, a seemingly practical problem appeared. The original design called for continuous hanger rods. A single rod would run from the roof structure through the fourth floor walkway connection and continue downward to support the second floor walkway. But producing and installing those long rods created practical difficulties. So Haven Steel proposed a change. Instead of one continuous rod, the system would use 2 separate rods. One rod would connect the roof to the fourth floor walkway. A second rod would connect the fourth floor walkway to the second floor walkway below. From a fabrication perspective, the change made sense. Structurally, however, it changed the load path, and that distinction would become fatal. Imagine 2 platforms hanging one above the other. With the original continuous rod, the lower walkway's load could travel past the fourth floor connection and continue upward toward the roof. But with the revised 2-rod arrangement, that continuous load path disappeared. The fourth floor connection now became the point through which the load from the lower walkway was transferred. It was no longer carrying only the fourth floor walkway. It was also carrying the weight of the second floor walkway suspended beneath it. The National Bureau of Standards later concluded that the modification essentially doubled the load on the fourth floor box beam to hanger rod connections. But there was another problem. The original connection design was already deficient. According to the NBS structural analysis, the original, unmodified connection had an estimated ultimate capacity of only around 60% of what the Kansas City Building Code required. The design was already inadequate. The 2-rod modification made the situation dramatically worse. The modified connection was estimated at only around 31% of the required code capacity. These were analytical estimates based on the NBS Investigation's structural calculations and assumptions. But the conclusion was clear. The change had fundamentally altered the forces acting on the connection. That meant the connection needed to be analyzed again. It wasn't. Haven Steel contacted the engineering firm about changing the hanger rod arrangement. The modification was discussed by telephone. According to the later investigation, the change was verbally indicated as acceptable, while the engineering firm stated that it expected a formal written request to follow. That written request never materialized. But the more important failure came later. Shop drawings reflecting the 2-rod arrangement were prepared and eventually returned through the engineering review process. The critical connection was not subjected to the structural calculation that the change required. The drawings were approved. The Kansas City Building Department also reviewed the project through its permitting process and did not identify the deficiency. Several layers of professional oversight had existed around the structure. But none performed the one calculation that mattered most: Could the modified connection safely carry the new load? The answer was never properly established. The walkways were built, and the hotel opened. For more than a year, nothing appeared to be wrong. People walked across the suspended platforms. Events were held beneath them. The structure carried its own weight and the ordinary loads of people using the walkways. There was no visible warning that the critical connection had almost no meaningful reserve capacity. Then came July 17, 1981. The hotel was hosting a tea dance in the atrium, organized by the Kansas City Structural Engineers Association. Hundreds of people had gathered. Some were on the atrium floor. Others stood on the suspended walkways, watching the event below. The structure was carrying normal occupancy loads. There was no earthquake, no explosion, no extraordinary external event. Then the fourth-floor connection failed. Investigators later identified the failure at the fourth-floor box beam connections, where the hanger rod assembly pulled through the box beam under load. The fourth-floor walkway dropped. It struck the second-floor walkway beneath it. The lower walkway could not withstand the impact. Both structures collapsed into the atrium. In seconds, the hotel's architectural centerpiece became a mass of steel, concrete, and debris. 114 people died. More than 200 were injured. The investigation began almost immediately. Researchers from the National Bureau of Standards arrived in Kansas City within days. They examined the surviving structure. They recovered damaged steel. They studied fractures and measured components. They conducted laboratory testing. And piece by piece, they reconstructed the load path that had existed before the collapse. What they found was not an unpredictable chain of extraordinary events. The physical mechanism was straightforward. The modified hanger arrangement had transferred additional load through the fourth-floor connection. That connection was dangerously deficient, and the change had never received the structural reanalysis it required. The people who arrived at the hotel that evening did not create the weakness. They simply became the load that finally exposed it. But the investigators had a deeper question. How had such a dangerous connection been built inside a project involving professional engineers, steel fabricators, shop drawings, inspections, and municipal review? The answer was not a single mistake. It was a breakdown between responsibilities. A fabrication problem became a design modification. The design modification was discussed by telephone. A written follow-up did not arrive. Shop drawings reflected the revised arrangement. The drawings went through review. But the structural calculation did not follow the change. The system contained many responsibilities. What it lacked was a reliable point at which someone stopped and asked whether the modification had fundamentally changed the structure. That distinction became central to the case. A shop drawing review is not automatically a complete reanalysis of a structure. But when a change alters the load path, the question is no longer simply whether the fabricator followed the original design intent. The engineer must determine whether the altered structure is still adequate. At the Hyatt, that verification did not happen. The consequences reached far beyond the hotel. In 1985, the Missouri Licensing Board revoked the professional licenses of principals Jack Gillum and Daniel Duncan, finding gross negligence, misconduct, and unprofessional conduct. The engineers appealed. Their license revocations were later overturned. The legal outcome did not erase the engineering lessons. The Hyatt Regency collapse became a major case study in structural engineering and professional ethics. It demonstrated why responsibility for design cannot disappear simply because work passes between organizations. A fabricator can identify a practical problem. A detailer can prepare drawings. A building department can review submitted documents. But when a change alters the structural behavior of a system, someone must recognize that it has become a structural question. Someone must perform the analysis, and someone must take responsibility for confirming that the altered structure remains safe. The Hyatt Regency collapse is often remembered as an engineering mistake, but that description is too simple. The more revealing story is what happened between the mistake and the disaster. A routine construction change altered the load path. The altered load path increased the demand on a critical connection. The connection was not adequately reanalyzed. The drawings were approved. The building passed through additional layers of review. The hotel opened. and for more than a year, nothing appeared wrong. Then, during an ordinary evening event, the hidden weakness was exposed. The National Bureau of Standards published its investigation in 1982 as Building Science Series 143, documenting the physical evidence, testing, and structural analysis of the collapse. The case became a lasting lesson in engineering responsibility because the disaster was not caused by an impossible force. It was created by an ordinary change that was treated as if it were ordinary. That is what makes the Hyatt Regency collapse so important. The system did not lack talented people. It did not lack procedures. It did not lack drawings, approvals, or professional seals. What it lacked was certainty that someone had followed the consequences of the change all the way through the system. The dangerous question was simple. Did the new connection actually work? The answer was inside the steel. The calculation could have exposed it before the walkways were built. It could have been exposed during a shop drawing review. It could have been discovered during another layer of oversight, but it wasn't. And on July 17, 1981, the structure finally answered the question for everyone. The steel did not suddenly become weak. The weakness had been created long before the crowd entered the atrium. The failure was not simply in the connection. It was in the system that allowed the connection to go unchecked. If you want to see more documentaries about engineering failures, hidden system weaknesses, and the moments when trusted systems break, subscribe to Null Theory.